So let's talk about Nvidia's RTX 3080 versus AMD's RX 6800 XT. Now, these are going to be very closely competing GPUs, not only in performance, but as well as in price. Let's talk about which one you should get and why, with some pointers to consider for each one. So let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Remember to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm, makes me happy. Subscribe for more content like this, hit that notification bell. So let's talk about the topic at hand. The RTX 3080 versus AMD's RDNA 2 Big Navi, the 6800 XT, is going to be the most closely competing GPU from Team Red. Now, since this is AMD's first foray into really high-end GPUs, I think a lot of people will be new to the AMD ecosystem. A lot of people are used to using Nvidia year after year, and there are little things that actually matter with that, like you're going to get used to using GeForce Experience and getting drivers. So anytime you switch over to something like AMD, it's going to be pretty much a whole new system. The ideas are the same, but basically everything changes. There are little things as well as major things that you may not do on Nvidia compared to AMD, switching between both of them. So let's talk about a few important points that you should know if you're thinking about getting either the RTX 3080 or AMD's RX 6800 XT. And of course, let's get the major point out of the way, and that's going to be stock and availability. Nothing else matters if we don't have sufficient stock or the GPUs to actually purchase. Now, we can comment on Nvidia. I mean, the RTX 3080 launch is pretty much legendary by now. We know that there was such high demand and such limited availability that really not too many people were able to get their hands on the GPUs. Even to this day, those issues continue. There really hasn't been any further increase in stock. I've been watching everywhere from Newegg, Amazon, even local micro centers. Occasionally, they will get in some 3080s, but it's still been very, very rare. And of course, the case is pretty much the same for the 3090. The 3070 was available in a little bit larger quantity, but that is pretty much sold out now across the board. So you're certainly going to be having a lot of issues this year getting an RTX 3080. That's a very important point to consider. According to Nvidia themselves, the stock may eventually improve, but this is going to be only in 2021. So for now, you're pretty much stuck with whatever you can find, whatever you can get. So having said that, what about AMD's RDNA 2, specifically the 6800 XT that we're talking about today? Now, this GPU will release November 18th, so of course, it's only speculation as to how the stock will be, but judging by everything that's going on in the market so far, you can pretty much assume that the stock levels, availability, and demand for the RX GPU, specifically the 6800 XT, will pretty much be on the same level as the RTX 3080, meaning pretty much instantly sold out and really high demand and low availability across the board. Now, of course, AMD has had a little bit more time to prepare for this launch, and of course, they've watched Nvidia go through the 3080, 90, and 3070 launches, so I'm sure they've picked up on a few tips. In fact, they even sent a letter to their third-party partners and resellers saying how they should minimize sales to one person, try to stop bots and different nefarious means from actually getting their hands on these GPUs and scalpers and things like that to the best of their ability. But of course, I think that letter is more just like a marketing ploy, because it does not really going to have much of an effect on most of these resellers unless they actually change their systems, make their websites more secure, which can be a pretty expensive endeavor. So for now, we're kind of left looking at the AMD launch. AMD doesn't have that much of an advantage in terms of components and parts. Sure, I think the memory that they use, the GDDR6, is going to be a little bit easier for them to get as compared to something like the GDDR6X, but look at the 3070. That has the regular memory as well without the X, and that's certainly sold out now and certainly in very limited quantities. So I realistically would expect to be the AMD launch to be just as in demand as the Nvidia, especially after seeing all of these benchmarks and the performance has been really hyped up. So I would say that at this time, until AMD actually proves otherwise, I think we will see these AMD cards sell out just as fast and be in much limited availability for a while as well. So now that the stock issue is out of the way, what about price to performance? Which one is looking better? Well, AMD has teased some of the RX 6800 XT benchmarks, and it seems like in certain games it will beat the 3080. It's kind of a back and forth. They're certainly very close. We have to remember the MSRP of the 3080 is $699, and of the 6800 XT is going to be $640. And of the 6800 XT, the MSRP will be $649. So both are certainly very close in terms of MSRP. Of course, with the AMD GPU being slightly cheaper. But remember, these are going to be sort of the founder edition prices from either AMD or Nvidia. Third-party GPU partners are considerably more expensive. Even the 3080, you can find them anywhere from $750 to $850 if you're going to look for like an EVGA or an ASUS third-party model. Of course, this has always been true, and this will also be true about AMD's third-party GPUs. And of course, we know that stock is limited now, so you can't even really find those at MSRP. But anyway, we will take that MSRP as a reference just to see where the manufacturer wanted to price these GPUs at. Eventually, when stock stabilizes, I think they should be much closer to these MSRP prices. So there's about a $50 difference between AMD and Nvidia, and according to some of the benchmarks that AMD themselves have posted, certainly the RX 6800 XT seems to be very promising, performing just as well if not better in certain games than the Nvidia RTX 3080. Now this will be very dependent on different driver updates and optimizations. In the past, AMD hasn't been the best in terms of their drivers. Nvidia generally seems to put out pretty smooth drivers, and whenever there is an issue, they seem to fix it pretty quickly. Just like when the RTX 3080 launched, there was that issue with GPUs going over 2 gigahertz and crashing to the desktop. Nvidia fixed that pretty quickly within like a week and a half. AMD certainly took a little bit longer with their 5700 XT, but by the looks of their RDNA 2, they're really taking the high-end GPU market seriously. So I'm sure that the driver team has to accompany that journey and make sure that everything is well optimized and we won't have any significant issues. So in terms of the price to performance, they're actually very close, and it's going to end up being based on the real world benchmarks of different games, which games actually are more optimized for one or the other. Right now, according to AMD's benchmarks, of course, yes, some games are better on the RX 6800 XT, but by no means is it blowing the RTX 3080 out of the water. Certain games, the RX 3080 will win, so it really depends on the game, but it's definitely impressive to see the RX 6800 XT being very competitive with a high-end Nvidia GPU. So now let's talk about some major areas where these GPUs differ. Now, Nvidia certainly has been on the market considerably longer with these high-end GPUs, and they certainly have a significant lead in certain elements. For example, they have ray tracing, which they initially launched with the RTX 20 series, but now it's been significantly improved where you don't get as much of a frames per second penalty when you do have ray tracing on. So certainly a lot of games look great, a lot nicer shadows and water glistening effects and things of that nature. So certainly ray tracing has improved a decent amount, as well as their DLSS 2.0. Basically, that's almost like their artificial intelligence that gives you much better performance and improves the graphics. So that's something that AMD, as of right now at least, is missing. Even though AMD technically does support ray tracing, they really haven't spoken about it at all that much, just because I think most likely they're going to be fairly far behind of Nvidia at this point. So it's going to take a while for them to catch up with that, maybe another generation or so. And of course, Nvidia is also going to be superior in a few different areas. For example, professional workstation applications. Even when I use DaVinci Resolve, the Nvidia encoder is one of the fastest encoders you can possibly use in terms of rendering videos. So Nvidia has a significant legs up on AMD. Even the previous generation 5700 XT, even though in gaming it got pretty close to like a 2060 Super and 2070 Super, in terms of their encoder for rendering, it was certainly lagging far behind any of these Nvidia GPUs. So that's going to be an area that Nvidia has a significant impact in, and I think it's going to take a while before AMD actually catches up to this professional workspace. Now, AMD does have a few specific tricks up its sleeves, nothing as significant as what Nvidia has with ray tracing and even with the encoders, but they do have some automatic overclocking called rage mode. I think that's why when you look at a lot of these benchmarks between AMD and Nvidia, make sure you check if the rage mode is on, like if it's going up against a 3090. And of course, AMD even has a nice synergy between their Ryzen 5000 CPUs as well as their RDNA 2 GPUs with how they will access the memory. Basically, you can click a button in BIOS, and then if you have a Ryzen 5000 CPU, like the ones that are being released now, you can unlock more performance from your RDNA 2 GPU, and they listed somewhere between like 5 to 13% improvements in certain games. So if that actually gets optimized more in the future, that could actually be really significant, and maybe that could give some of the Nvidia software features a run for their money. But as of right now, they're mostly just like little niceties and little niche items that aren't really going to have a widespread impact, because of course not everybody's going to have a Ryzen 5000 CPU, and not everybody's going to want to use rage mode or whatever auto overclocking that they have on there. So certainly Nvidia does seem to have a leg up in terms of software and different support, especially for different professional applications. So which GPU should you buy, the RTX 3080 or the RDNA 6800 XT? Now, a lot will have to be seen when it comes to stock. We have to see if the availability will improve of the RTX 3080 or if AMD's GPUs will also be perpetually out of stock. Aside from that, Nvidia certainly has a much better track record in the high end, just because AMD has never been there before. So my suggestion would be, if you actually find a 3080 now, you're still going to be getting class leading performance. And of course, most likely you'll have much better drivers, at least in the beginning. We will see how AMD's drivers and stock will behave, but it's certainly very exciting because the performance benchmarks that they've shown us so far certainly shows the 6800 XT to either beat or be very close to the RTX 3080 pretty much across the board in all of the different titles. So we're going to have to see if AMD will have any type of growing pains in this high-end market. Pricing wise, they're pretty good. They're within $50 of the RTX 3080, and I think the 6800 XT probably presents itself as an even better value compared to the 6800, just because for only a little bit more, you certainly are getting a good deal more performance. And let's not forget the VRAM. All of these AMD GPUs will have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. That's something that was really a sore point with the RTX 3080, which only has 10 gigabytes of VRAM, but important to note that it is a GDDR6X RAM, just like on the 3090, as opposed to AMD, who are still using the regular GDDR6, which is a slower VRAM. But of course, I think AMD is using some type of software magic in order to be able to at least boost the performance of that VRAM. But the RTX 3080 technically does have faster VRAM, even though it has less of it. And then lastly, a quick note on CPUs. A lot of people are concerned about bottlenecking their GPUs. So with a 3080 or even the 6800 XT, what type of CPU should you go for? With the 6800 XT, because of its nice synergy with the Ryzen 5000 CPUs, I would certainly recommend you get something like a 5800 or a 5900X. I think that's going to be the sweet spot, allow you to unlock more memory performance from your GPU. So I would certainly do one of the Ryzen 5000 CPUs if you're planning to get RDNA 2, and if it's the 6800 XT, I would skip the 5600X and go for something like the 58 or 59X, which will be 8 and 12 core respectively, giving you a lot more future proofing in games. 6 core and 12 thread does seem to be getting a little bit older now going into 2021, as some games may be able to utilize pretty soon 8 cores and above. With the RTX 3080, I would make the same recommendation of Ryzen 5000. I think the 5800X or the 5900X will be absolutely amazing for this GPU. Of course, you could always pair it with like an Intel 10900K. That's still going to perform very, very well. And you have the more modern Intel CPUs. But with the RTX 3080, I would avoid putting in anything that's much lower, because you may start to bottleneck, especially at 1080p, even 1440p. With 4K, you won't have as big of an issue, but I would definitely pair at least a really fast mid-range CPU on up. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this comparison. Good luck GPU hunting out there. I hope you guys can find the exact GPU that you want. Let me know if you have any questions down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.